All right. Well, it is a Saturday, and you know what we like to do on Saturdays here at Rec Poker? We get together and we have a little study group based around some of the material that was released earlier in the month. It's April, and the theme this month was Final Tables and ICM. That's the independent chip model, and it basically gets into reasons why you might play one way at one point in the tournament, and you might play differently later in the tournament, or when the bubble's coming, or other times when your chip stack has kind of a different value than it does in the early stages of the tournament. And we won't get into calculating ICM, but if folks in the group here or folks that are watching afterwards, once you figure out exactly what ICM is and how to calculate it, a lot of the different adjustments that you might make during your play will become kind of secondhand. And that's really what this is all about. Understanding the why of certain things so that we can apply them at the table. So
I think that the easiest offhand way to think of ICM is what's the utility of your hand after you play the hand? What happens when you win? What happens when you lose? How is your stack going to be affected?
Yep.
And I think that's the quick and easy way to. I mean, if you actually look up how ICM is calculated, it's very complicated. But
yeah, the formula is complicated.
It boils down to, if I lose, what am I going to do with this 5 big blind stack?
Right.
And that, yeah.
And yeah, and then you might often hear the adage that the last chip in your stack is worth more than any other chip in there, because you can lose some of your chips and you're still in the tournament, but if you lose your final chip, then you're not in the tournament anymore. And so there's a big drop off in value. What it means is that the chips that you can accumulate by winning a hand, while they are valuable, they're not as valuable as the chips you lose if you lose a hand. So there's kind of a risk averse quality to ICM play. But it has some counterintuitive corollaries that go along with that. Hi, Gennaro. Happy Easter. Thanks for joining us. Oh yeah, happy Easter, John, and Eric too.
Thank you too.
So Ryan LaPlante at Learn Pro Poker, he releases these videos every month for Rec Poker members. This one was a hand history of him going over some final table hands, and we can get into some of those spots there. But basically, for people that are less familiar with the concept, it means that essentially you're going to be playing tighter ranges. You're going to be folding more because your risk of ruin is greater when you get closer to bubbles or payouts, that sort of thing. But it also means you're going to be shoving differently. You're going to be creating a problem for other people. Because usually the way that people screw up ICM usually by calling incorrectly. And so you kind of get into this situation where, like with so much of poker, it really comes down to what are the assumptions that you're making about your opponents. If you can think, oh, well, I'm going to shove here because my opponent, if they know ICM, they have to fold almost every hand that's not pocket aces or pocket kings. And that makes it a profitable shove for me with like ace 4 offsuit or something like that, just as an example. But if your opponent is not very ICM savvy, they might not know that they're supposed to fold the bulk of their range there. And then they might end up calling you. And then you've kind of trapped yourself a little bit because the assumptions that you made about your opponent were not really on the right level for the game that they're playing. So first of all, one of the things I like about Ryan's video, he starts by talking about how the pre-session routine is so important. Now, does anyone here, we're all recreational players, we play when we have time. Does anyone here have a routine for when they're going to start playing? Or maybe not every day, but like if Sunday is the day that you do a lot of play, do you have like a Sunday morning routine? Or when you're just going to go fire up some tables, is there something that you do first to prepare, or do you just dive right into the poker? I'm guessing
I've got Elliott Rose MP3s.
And, yeah.
So I'll lay down and take a 15-minute nap and listen to 15-minute MP3
Mhm.
and before I start, and then I kind of goof off for 10 minutes, wake back up, and then I play.
I like that. And Elliott Rowe, if our listeners don't know, is all about mental game and preparing yourself to have the resilience and acuity in real time to make good poker decisions. And I think that's a great way to do it. And I think if you go to rec.poker/resources, you might even get a discount code on some of Elliott's material. So go check that out, because he's the man when it comes to that sort of thing. Yeah, mindset training is so important, because especially when we get into final tables, this is where the really expensive decisions happen. So you know, the pay jumps at the final table are going to be significantly larger than any of the pay jumps earlier in the tournament. So the mistakes that you make at the final table are much more costly than the mistakes that you might make at an earlier stage in the tournament. And we've talked about this before. You know, poker is kind of like golf, in that at the end of the day, at the end of the round, the winner is often the person who just made the fewest mistakes or made the smaller mistakes. It's not even about having like a super high A game so much as it's just curtailing that C and D game a bit. Especially in the games we're playing in, we might have an edge at the final table because we've been studying ICM, we've been simulating final tables, we've been playing in the Rec Poker home game and getting down to shorthanded action and heads up like that. Those are circumstances that are hard to create otherwise. When we were putting this month together, the theme of ICM and final tables, that was one thing we struggled with a little bit, was like, well, how do you actually practice that? Like, how do you actually prepare for it? Because studying the formulas for ICM is one thing, and like talking about the abstract subjects is another thing, but to actually be able to apply it at the table is difficult. Has anyone here in the group felt that, or have you felt like in the final table, it's like, I feel like I know all this stuff, but how does that tell me whether I'm supposed to call, fold, or raise here?
Every hand.
Yeah. Yeah. Hey, me too, Eric. Me too.
Because there's a lot of it's mixed strategies if you look at the solvers.
Yes.
So then you're just playing in your mind anyway, just like you were before you learned all that stuff.
Yeah.
And
yeah, I'm not there yet. I just tighten up.
Yeah.
Right?
Generally good. That's generally good strategy.
Right? Just, you know, I don't really play unless I actually have something.
Yeah.
So
yeah,
I have a question though. Where's this video you keep referring to?
Oh yeah, here, let me put the here, you guys talk for a second. I'll just pull up the video, put it in the chat here. You guys go ahead.
Oh yeah, I've been studying ICM pretty hard the last week or two, and I'm starting to realize that ICM is more like outrunning a bear. You really don't need to outrun the bear. You just need to outrun the guy beside you.
Yes, Eric, that is awesome, man. I love that. I don't have to be faster than the bear. I just got to be faster than you.
Yeah.
Well, until
and if I know more ICM than you, I'm going to have a better chance.
Yeah, I like that.
Until you get heads up. That's been my problem.
Right.
I lost another one last night.
Oh no. Yep. Heads up, eh? And you know, John, those stacks are pretty deep heads up too. By the time you get the heads up in the home game, like the average chip stack, something like 25 or 30 big blinds or maybe even more than that.
Even more than that, yes.
Yeah. And that, honestly, quick segue. We're getting more players in the home games. I think someone suggested the other day that we actually speed up the levels a bit, the blind structure a bit.
I did.
Yeah. Oh yeah, it was in the OPA, wasn't it, John?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I sent a note to John about that. I think I'll reinforce that with him, because it is getting kind of late in the night too, when people are duking it out with like 50 big blinds each heads up. Yeah, and there's nowhere to hide, right, John? When your heads up like that, you have to play such a high frequency of hands, and so then you find yourself post flop in all these weird spots where you don't know what their range is, and you're playing hands that you wouldn't normally be playing in that kind of a spot and stuff like that.
Yeah, you've got two suited cards, so you play it, and then what do I do with this 10-2 suited now?
Right. Well, and you get into a lot of spot where it's like, okay, I've got bottom pair, which is ahead of my opponent's total range, but it's a garbage hand. Like, I don't feel like it, you end up in these spots where it's like, am I bluff catching? Am I, and it feels like the middle 60% of the deck is putting you in these uncomfortable positions, right? Like the top 20% you know how to play, and the bottom 20% you know how to play. But almost every almost every other hole that you can have, and it gets us in a position where we can kind of get into trouble with that too.
Especially when you're playing against an aggressive heads up player.
Yes. Yes.
That's-
And Gennaro. Yeah.
Yeah, no, like yesterday I got pretty deep into a tournament and I caught this guy bluffing twice, right? It wasn't heads up or anything, but he was just kept jamming, right?
Mm.
And it was in the money. So I was like, should I call him? Shouldn't, whatever, right? And then like the third time he actually flopped the straight.
Oh, wow.
But
right.
and he beat me, but it's, but he was playing 50% of hands. He was raising and shoving on the river almost every hand. And it's like, sometimes what do you do, right? I mean, called him a couple times and I, did really well, but then, third time was a charm for him.
Yeah, that's the advantage of being loose and aggressive is eventually you actually do have it. And they
Yeah.
Yeah. And it puts the other player in kind of a guessing game, which is the thing. Like that's the one real key to being the aggressive player of the two, is that you've got two ways to win the pot. When you're the player that only has the chance to call or fold, you really only have one way to win the pot. And that's by actually getting to showdown with the better hand. And that's just hard to do. That's just hard to do. So aggression becomes even more important when we get to ICM spots, whether it's approaching the bubble of the entire tournament, or whether it's approaching the final table, or whether it's at the final table where the pay jumps are big and worth worrying about. So one general rule is that you tend not to see a lot of calling in those kind of spots. So because it sounds a little counterintuitive, but shoving is actually lower variance than calling. We talk about, we want to like, oh, I want to just like lower my variance and play it safe here and call and see if I hit a flop or not. It's actually higher variance to do it that way than just to get your hand in pre-flop, because they're going to fold a whole lot of the time, which is great. You get to pick up that pot, which is excellent. And in fact, you know what? I'm not going to define this right now because I don't like doing this stuff live on the air, but I'll see if I can put in the description a smarter way of saying that for why that is the case. But when we call, we're often just putting ourselves in kind of like a fit or fold mode, and it's just it's harder to kind of proceed with confidence in those spots. Hey, there she is.
Yeah, she's here.
So one of the things that they say is important about ICM is that the stronger the ICM implications are, the more important your fold equity is.
And the more, and again, for thinking players, the more they'll feel that pressure. And when the ICM pressure is high, it's a good time to be over betting, making big bets and raises. But you can also do it with relatively small sizes, depending on the stacks of the players in the hand, and not only their own stack, but the other stacks of the players at the final table. So one thing,
my problem with shoving is the sunken cost I have in the tournament already. Because I mean, when you make the final table on ACR, you've been playing for 7 hours.
Yeah.
And you get middle pair. You really don't want to shove and go out with middle pair, or king queen suited. They have an ace, so it's really hard.
Yeah. Well, then just fold. Then you can just fold too. Oh,
but that's true. Yeah.
That because sometimes we feel like, oh well, I can't. I've got this pretty good hand. I can't just not give it a chance. But you can. And that gets to some of these decisions that we're going to be making in that situation where some of the hands that you would like to call with, you just don't give yourself permission to play them unless it's as a fold or as a raise, because of that exact spot. Who wants middle pair? Who wants middle pair in an ICM spot? You can't value bet it, right? Because if you bet, the only hands that are beating you, that are calling, are the ones that beat you. And you're basically creating a situation where you're like, well, I'm either going to fold or I'm going to hope that this opponent is bluffing enough, because they're going to be value betting all the times they normally would value bet. And I'm crushed by their value betting range. So I'm basically playing to like engineer a situation where a very aggressive a player can make a bet that we think has enough bluff combos in it that we can call. And then that is high variance. That is high variance right there. Then we're in that same kind of guessing game that we're trying to put other people in. And I mean, you see people make soul reads, and you know, there's like, it feels great when you snap them off and they roll over the bluff, and you know, but it's harder. It's a much harder way to play poker. So honestly, Eric, I would say, you know, don't be afraid to just fold those hands. And when we get into these kind of spots, I think thin value is kind of less important. And like getting value from hands like second pair becomes less important than not losing chips to better hands.
In Darrell Carney's book, Satellites, which is for, you know, the ultimate ICM, a satellite tournament.
Yeah.
He just progressively, as the ICM grows, he just progressively drops the small pairs out of his ranges and completely cuts off suited connectors and replaces them with suited aces, or the high card becomes more important than the small pair.
And John, are you talking about like opening ranges when yes. So so John, you're saying, so in this scenario that Darrow's talking about in his book, when you have, is it when the stacks are deeper, or when the ICM pressure is when the stacks are shorter, or when the ICM pressure is greater, that he tightens this up?
When the ICM pressure is greater. Yep.
And that might not always be at the perfectly intuitive time either, because we think about ICM pressure being related to payouts, and it is, but it's also really related to who are the other players at the table and who's actually under the most ICM pressure.
And stack sizes.
Stack sizes is the key. Yeah. If you told me that I could only pay attention to one piece of information about players at a final table, I would just care about their stack size. And I wouldn't need to know anything else about them to sort of think about who should be doing what, who I can apply pressure to, who I want to wait out to ladder up, and that kind of stuff. I think there's nothing more important than stack size when it comes to final tables. And typically, the person with the smallest stack is actually under the least ICM pressure. Maybe not the least, but very little, because they're kind of supposed to go out next anyway. If everyone just folded until the blinds got up, they'd be the next player out. So they're kind of owed that ninth place money, let's say. The people that are really under pressure are the players with, you know, in chip stack counts 6, 7, and 8, because they do not want to bust before that short stack busts. That's a nightmare for them, because if the short stack busts in ninth, everybody else gets a little pay bump by just laddering up. And now 8th is the worst place you can win. So when we are playing at a final table, it's important to think about who are we trying to apply pressure to, because the short stack is actually more likely to just say, all right, buddy, let's go. Like, let's flip those chips in and see, because they're not owed, you know, they're not expected to finish any higher than last place. But that 6th, 7th, 8th player, if you put them all in, they're under a great deal of pressure, because they really don't want to bust 9th when they've got the 6th most chips at the table. Does that square? Are we on the same page there?
Yeah, the interview with Darrell Kearney was great, where he was talking about he got a final table and he was the short stack.
Yes.
And he didn't play one hand and ended up heads up in the tournament. It's like, because everybody punted off their stacks before him. And that's just amazing, you know.
I think we did an episode on the podcast last year with the two poker guys, and they were talking about ICM suicide. And so anytime, let's say you're at a 9-handed player, 9-handed final table, and the number 2 chip stack and the number 3 chip stack get all in pre-flop or something like that. One of them has aces and one of them has kings. That is just a terrible, terrible decision by those, particularly by the one who's covered, because they should really just be staying out of each other's way and waiting for the smaller stacks to bust. And yeah, Dara, it's just like we were saying earlier, right? If you can get into a final table where other players are going to make bigger mistakes than you or more mistakes than you, you can find yourself heads up without even playing a hand, because people don't kind of appreciate how valuable that is. I'm actually kicking my own butt right now because I'm playing this WSOP satellite league, and I'm in first in the league, but I don't have it locked up. We've got one more game to play. And in the last game we were playing, I was like, if I took top 3, I think I would have locked it up. And I ended up taking this spot when I was in 8th. And I opened with 10-9 suited on the button. I got a small 3-bet from the blinds. And the mistake I made was calling. I just shouldn't have called. I should have just folded or shoved, but I think probably in this one just folded. But I ended up flopping. I have the 9-10 of clubs, and the flop came 8-jack of clubs with something else. So I've got the straight flush draw. And oh yeah, I've got every 7, every queen, any club, you know, come on, baby, bring it in. And I checked it out. So I did get in. I didn't make the draw. So I finished in 8th, which is fine. I'm still doing okay in the league, but in retrospect, and I did run it. I ran it in Equilab afterwards. And if you give the opponent pocket aces, queens, kings, and jacks, pocket 8s, and ace jack. So if you only give them top pair, top kicker, over pairs, or sets, I'm actually ahead of that range with my 9-10 suited, 52-48 or something like that.
Wow.
Yeah, so I felt good about the chip EV decision, because those very strong draws are often ahead of almost every mate hand. But given the ICM considerations, it's a point league, so finishing in 8th, they get fewer points than finishing in 6th and that kind of thing. I'm going to be, if I don't win the league, I'm going to be kicking myself a little bit for that one now. But it just goes to show, like, every decision I made, it's definitely an open pre-flop. I think the size was really good. The 3-bet out of position was really a good price for me to call in position and see. I got basically the flop of my dreams, and I didn't win the hand. We're not going to win all the hands that we're ahead on anyway. Obviously, this is poker. We all know that. But I could have just not invited that into my game at that point. I could have just decided not to. So
in those situations, again, Dara is saying that he's got this calculation for chance of cashing, and it goes in, and that you have to factor that into your equity, and that oftentimes what is chip EV is not ICM EV, because you may need 75% to make a call or shove, when normally your 52 versus 48 was the correct call in a cash game.
Yep.
But not necessarily in an ICM situation.
That's a great way of getting at it, John. So thanks for bringing that up. So one way that we can kind of calculate this is thinking about, okay, so in a chip EV spot, how much equity do we need to call here, given the pot odds and our equity in the hand? And in a cash game, as John points out, when there's no ICM consideration, you can just do that math. It's pretty simple, and make a decision that's ahead or behind. And in a cash game, you never need to worry about the blinds going up or tournament position and stuff like that. So it's a very kind of simple math. I love the way Dara gets at this. Like, you're adding a premium essentially to, you're raising the threshold of how much equity you need to have in order to make the call, because there's actually more at risk than just the chips, the value of your chips. There's also your tournament life, that bottom chip. And so it's valuable. And so you need to have a much stronger hand to be able to continue with it. And one of the things that's interesting as I'm sure, John, you noticed when you were reading that section, there aren't many hands that have 75% equity. There's really not. That's really high. Like there's not that many hands that have more than 60% equity.
Right.
So it really does sort of illustrate just how tight you have to be in those spots.
Yep.
Even in this hand with my opponent that I was referring to earlier, she had a set of eights. So as it turned out, she had 3-bet eights. Flop came 4-8 jack. So she had middle set. And I think even her equity with middle set against my draw, I think she still only had 62% equity with that exact hand.
Mhm.
So in John's example, if I had like shoved and put her all in, maybe even with middle set, I honestly, I considered, because this player was ICM aware, I considered showing her my hand and saying, I've got the combo draw here. I've got any club, any 7, any queen, will beat any hand that you have right now. Like, it doesn't matter what you have. If you have a set or 2 pair or an over pair or whatever. I didn't do it, but I wondered about the etiquette of that too. But I considered saying, like, do you want to flip for this? Because you can just fold.
Yeah.
Right? Because she's in it for the points too. And there are situations where, especially when you have a very strong draw, even if your opponent knows you have a very strong draw, if they're only doing 55-45 against that draw, there's kind of an incentive for them to fold the hand, because they get to just continue. They don't have to flip a coin. And even though they don't win the hand, so that's I maybe to my detriment, I really enjoy shoving very strong draws.
Me too.
Yeah. Because it puts people in a really uncomfortable position. In fact, against this very same player a couple months ago, we were in the top 3 of that week's game, and I think the flop came like queen 5-5 with 2 spades, and they bet, and I just shoved because I had the king 6 of spades. It was purely just a flush draw. And she, she's like looking at me, thinking about it. She's like, all right, well, I know you don't have a 5. She says, but even if all you have is a flush draw, I'm not sure I want to call here. I was like, right, yes. And again, I was like, I'll show you. But you can imagine if you're playing against someone who's not savvy about ICM, and you show them that you have a draw, they're like, oh, I want a piece of that. I'll call with my paired 7, because what are the odds of you hitting? So it really does depend, like, what level is your opponent on as well. So obviously I haven't figured this out. I'm going to be kicking myself about that stupid hand for a long time now, but we'll just see.
I was in WSOP satellite the other night.
Oh yeah, right.
And it wasn't a really strong ICM at that point. There were 117 players left and 29 getting paid, but I had been card dead for 3 hours.
Yep.
I had a pair of 8s on the small blind, so I opened, got raised from the big blind, who I know had also been card dead because she kept complaining to me. and she 3-bet. I called that, and with the intention of no set, no bet.
Yep.
And of course, the flop came out 5, 6, 7. And I checked, and she shoved.
Ouch.
And she just had me covered. And I just kept hearing Dara in the back of my head saying, "Fold these, fold these, fold these," and I called. I got knocked out of the tournament right there.
Did she have a bigger pair?
She had pocket kings.
Yeah.
I knew that, and I knew that she did. The only thing that I was possibly ahead of was ace king, because otherwise she had queens, kings, or aces.
Right.
Because
of the action. Yeah. But that's it, man. I mean, good for you for recognizing it, though, right? Like, honestly, and John, I'll be serious now. There's this whole chapter in your evolution of a player where first you start recognizing it and then you start believing that you've recognized it. You know, so there's this whole phase where it's like, they've got me beat. I'm just gonna call and make sure. And then once you get into that spot enough, it's like the confidence, sleeping well at night, knowing that even if they did have ace king that one time, they have aces, kings, and queens so much more often that it makes it okay that you kind of got bluffed. I think that's an emotional level that we have to reach as poker players. This ability to walk away from a hand and actually not know if they were bluffing or not, and like not know if we should have beat them or shouldn't have beat them, and just actually accepting that, like the big picture, the long range. When it comes to that, I struggle with that. I struggle with that a lot, man. I routinely want to just find myself winning like this hand of poker that I'm playing in right now. I just want to win this hand. And unfortunately, the only two ways to do that are by having the best hand or by making your opponent fold. And if it turns out that your opponent has a very strong hand, neither one of those is going to work, my friend. So you might not be able to win the hand. And if you're not going to win the hand, then it's like, okay, well, how can I lose the least on this hand that I'm not going to win? Yeah,
I've got a question it's not really ICM, but going back to your straight flush draw hand, you said you debated showing her the cards, and I'm basically an online player. So why was your thinking? I mean, I don't understand the table dynamics of live play that well.
So basically,
and you had an ethical decision about that, right? Is that what it was? Was it collusion or?
I had two conundrums there. So I had the etiquette question of, is showing your hand fair play? Like, is it? And I think if you're in a multi-way pot, clearly you should not talk about your hand. You should not show your cards, because you can influence action of other people. When your head's up, it's really just you and this other player. So you can talk to each other more because you're not influencing anybody else. And depending on the card room you're in, you can show a card or show two cards. There's kind of like a gamesmanship that's involved at a certain point when two players are in a hand together. So there was this etiquette question of, like, is it appropriate for me to ever like show a card or show two cards in this situation? And that probably varies from game to game and table to table and room to room. I don't want to, like, for me, the most important thing is having a good time, everyone feeling like they're enjoying themselves. You know, I'm never going to be someone who feels like I'm trying to be like a dick at the table or like shoot an angle or something like that. So when in doubt, I tend to just skew towards just not getting out of line.
Conservatism. Yeah. But if you turned over your straight flush draw and then went all in, you put her in a big decision.
So that was my second conundrum, Eric, because right when she c-bets the flop, I'm in position now, and I'm in a very difficult spot because I have to decide how am I going to proceed. And if I just shove, which is what I did, then, you know, she's going to be thinking about my entire hand range of all the hands that I could be shoving with, and they're a mix of, you know, sets and two pair and one pair and draws and stuff like that. And so it's if I can, there's something unique about this extremely strong draw, that it's kind of behind and ahead at the same time. It's behind if she has a pair or better, because I have an unpaired hand. But the equity is actually such that by the time the hand is over, I'm going to win more often than I lose against that range of hands. So by showing her my hand, I'm kind of making her decision more difficult.
Yeah.
Even though I'm giving her perfect information.
Yep.
Because now she actually knows what the odds are of winning the hand versus not winning the hand. And
her set has what, 40% or whatever.
Yeah. I, actually, in that case, her exact hand had it was a favorite. It was a favorite. The set is a favorite because I can't hit 2 pair to improve, which is what ended up happening, by the way. The turn and river came 9-10, and I hit 2 pair to not improve.
No.
Just make it a brick or something. I'm gonna need that 2 pair later. I'm gonna need that 2 pair in a different hand later. So Eric, my thinking was, because poker is about putting people to uncomfortable decisions. So I can make her, essentially, I thought it was more likely she would fold, is ultimately what it came down to. If I flip over bottom pair, she's calling 100% there. Because the range of hands that she c-bets with is doing really well against bottom pair. But if I turn over exactly that hand and tell her, 52% of the time you're going to lose the hand if you call here,
you have to know your card room, though, if you can turn over the card, even, because is it collusion, or what is the thing?
I think it wouldn't, this situation wouldn't be collusion because there's no one else in the hand that's being affected by it. I'm not sure what, I think different rooms have different rules for it. It's a good question, though.
I don't know that anybody has different rules for it. I think it's
how they're
always
enforced.
allowed. I think it's just, as you're talking about, etiquette.
That's a good point, John.
I believe it's always allowed.
I always thought that if you turn your cards over, then they're dead.
No.
Like if you're in a hand and somebody else sees your cards, then you have to flip them over and you're done.
I think that sounds like a different scenario. There's been, some of it comes down to like the action at the table. I think if you haven't mucked your cards, then they're still live, but everyone knows what they are. So it's obviously a huge disadvantage to you. If you were playing in if you were like in a 3 or 4 handed pot, that can get really annoying and frustrating, and for the other players too. And that happens every once in a while. People table their hand out of order, or like, they think their head's up and someone shoves and they're like, all right, I call, and they throw their hands down. It's like, oh wait, there's still another person in the hand.
I did exactly that the other night.
Me too. Me too. I've done that. This league I'm talking about, we've played 7 out of 8 games so far. I think in 3 out of the 7 games, I've accidentally tabled my hand out of order or something. Like, it happens to everybody.
Yeah.
I've never done it.
Yeah. All right. Well, we could all aspire. Gennaro. It is really embarrassing when it happens, obviously. But it just goes to show, look left. Look left every time. Yeah, John.
Yeah, no, I'm kidding. I've done it.
The player in front of me shoved, and I called and turned over my hand, and there was still somebody behind me.
Yeah.
That once she saw my hand, she folded. But in theory, she might have called. The other guy might have, or one of us would have picked up more chips. But
yes. And so that's how you can see there's an opportunity for collusion there, where you could be communicating to other players at the table the strength of your hand, to influence their action. And you can see how it's kind of different when there's only 2 players in the hand, because you're really just communicating with each other in a meaningful way.
And if you're all in,
yes,
I mean, it's just a call or a fold is by that point,
Yep. So I think I haven't played in this league before, so I'm still kind of learning some of the etiquette that these folks play with. But I think if I could do it again, like I wish I had showed her my hand, because it's the only time, and again, this is only with a very, very strong draw. It's the only time that you're kind of indifferent to how they proceed, to be honest with you. If they fold, great. You win a small pot and you get to continue in the tournament. If they call, quite often you're still going to win that pot. So that's pretty good. And this is the real key. In order for them to call, they have to risk their tournament life.
Yep.
When you shoved, it's true that you risk your tournament life, but only in the universe where they call. All the rest of the times where they fold, you win.
Yeah.
And then even and they should be calling really tight. So what are they folding? 90% of the time, 80% of the time?
Yep.
And then so they're continuing with that 20% of the time, but
And
you win half the time. Yeah. Right. So if you think about it in like the big picture, okay. So 10% of the time they call and you lose, 10% of the time they call and you win, and 80% of the time they fold and you win. So
it's pretty good.
You should be shoving, right?
Yeah.
That goes back to the point of how important fold equity is
Yes.
with ICM.
Yep, exactly. And how it's very different than in a cash game.
Yes.
Because in a cash game, you just, okay, I lose, I reload, I stay at the table, I'm still playing against the same opponents. Like you were saying earlier, but if we get to a final table on ACR, it's like 7 hours of my freaking day I've put in here. And I don't want to lose this spot. I don't want to lose this all in hand because it matters a lot more than it would in a typical cash game. So really being the player that applies the pressure is so important, even when it doesn't feel like you have that strong hand. Avoiding the temptation to like call and see a flop, or to call and, pot control. Like, so maybe we should talk a little bit about stack sizes too, because I don't want to get, we're talking about it as though it's all very short stacked, and that isn't always the case. Because of course you can still just call and get good odds and stuff like that. We're still playing poker at the final table. But once that bottom chip gets in to play, I think it does drastically change the way we approach like hand selection and that sort of thing. Trying to think of another spot. I had a hand in the home game where I c-bet with the nut flush draw, and someone check raised, and I called. And I think if being in the normal stages of a tournament, that's I think probably a slam dunk call given the action. But again, if it was an ICM spot, calling is just a difficult way to win poker tournaments. It's not. I don't. It's hard. It's hard to win by calling. Now you're not going to lose. Like, so how do you guys deal with the tension between like, so you're saying I don't want to lose the tournaments, so I should put all my chips in the middle.
Exactly.
Right.
Well, again, it depends. If you're the big stack, yes, because everybody else is afraid of you, and they're going to be folding a lot. If you're the small stack, yes, because you've got to gain more chips to move up the ladder. But if you're in the middle stacks, you don't want to be doing either of those. You don't want to be calling, and you don't want to be shoving unless you've got a premium hand. You
said it, John. All
that
right,
pretty much sums it up. Yeah.
You're wearing the hat next week, buddy. Yeah, that's it. Yeah, that's exactly it. And I think that there's a not a meta game, but there's like a mini game played within poker at the final table. And getting to the final table, everyone's playing poker. When you get to the final table, you're really playing a different game that uses poker as the way to play this game. And stack sizes are way more important. Putting people on to the test becomes really important, and not getting yourself into the position where someone can put you to that test is also really important. And I think that's why we don't 2x open off like a 13 big blind stack as much, because if we open, someone else can shove on us, and now we are in this difficult position of having to decide whether to call or not.
Yep.
Often it's better just to shove those 13 big blinds in yourself, even though the odds of someone behind you having aces is the exact same, whether you 2x or whether you shove, and you're going to lose. You're going to lose when they have aces, except for the 20% of the time that you try out on them, or the 25% of the time, whatever your hand is.
For the 60 on PokerStars.
Yeah, that's right. Aces plays like a drawing hand in some of these games.
Had a guy beat my kings with ace 8 and he got
yeah.
quad 8s.
Oh, okay. Well, at least he made it interesting.
Yeah.
That's not the way you usually lose kings to pocket to ace 8.
No,
Quad 8s. Holy cow.
it wasn't even suited. Bastard.
What a jerk.
Anyway, sorry.
No, that's it.
But what you are doing by shoving is weeding out all the queen tens, jack
Yes.
kings,
Yeah.
et cetera, et
Yes,
cetera. The aces
exactly.
are still going to call you, but those other hands that have the potential to hit, you're denying them their equity.
Yeah.
So that again, you're gaining that equity that you're taking from them, you're gaining is fold equity.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that ownership of that pot, right? Even though it's a small pot right now, you're kind of cleaning up the equity a bit. Like let's say you had pocket 9s or pocket 10s. That's a great example, John, where players are going to have hands like king jack, queen jack, stuff like that. They're not premium hands, but they've got good equity against your hand. And if you just 2x open, you're going to end up playing. I mean, maybe they call, and now you're playing poker for 11 big blinds and a 4 big blind stack, and you actually have to navigate that with pocket 9s. That's hard for one thing. And we don't.
And pocket 4s is going to call a 2x, and they're going to hit their set 12%.
Right. Yes, yes,
And
and that's going to be very difficult for you to make good decisions.
Mhm.
So even if if we shove pocket 9s with a 13 big blind stack, sometimes like when I was thinking about it, I was like, but don't we want them to come along with hands that we're ahead of? Like, don't we want them to come along with hands that we beat? It's like, not really. Like if we had exactly pocket aces, then we don't mind if they come along with like jack 10 or something. Well, I mean, but even still, we don't love that. Like they still have a surprising amount of equity. And if you look at the math, people talk about like, oh, what are the odds that he had X? It's like, well, I'll tell you exactly what the odds are. Like, you can just look it up. It's very clear. Like it's math. And then a certain portion of the time, a certain percentage of the time, they're going to hit this kind of flop and beat you. So like, it's unfortunate, but it's not really like surprising because it's math.
Yep.
Things that are going to happen at a certain frequency end up happening at a certain frequency.
And
So-
there again is the difference between a cash game and an ICM spot. You do want them to come along with all that garbage in a cash game because 51% of the time you're going to win.
Yes.
But in the ICM, again, it's either win or go home. You don't want to be taking those flips. You want to be getting it in there or you want to be knocking them out because you don't want them hitting their 15% to take you out of the tournament.
Okay.
You're happier winning the blinds than seeing a showdown almost
Yeah.
always.
Yeah, because the cost of showdown is so great when it doesn't go your way, which is going to do a certain frequency of the time. Even if you've got pocket aces, you're going to lose 20% of the time. So roughly. So you would much even if you could like pick the hand that they were going to have, it's like, okay, I want to have aces and I want them to have kings. You're going to lose that hand sometimes. And so, John, I think that's Merv's medal to you on that point. There, the difference between the cash game and ICM, because in a cash game, if you can set up a deck to run as a 51% favorite 1,000 times, you're going to make money. And it's a great spot. In a tournament, you don't get to choose if that 51 happens on the final table or in the earlier stages. And even, you can make the odds even better than that. Even if you're a 60-40, it's like you're saying, all right, do I want to embrace a 40% chance that I'm going to be out of the tournament on this hand?
Yep.
It's different. The cost is different. So the value is different. So tightening ranges, shoving more, calling less, and circling the stacks to target. Thinking about who are these stacks that we can target with our pressure. And honestly, I think playing the smallest stack on the final table is probably my favorite experience. I love playing the short stack. because I kind of get to choose when we're going to realize our equity, which I like. And I'm pretty disciplined.
You get a raise in 2 colors. You're just rubbing your hands together. So there we go.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I don't mind folding bad hands for like an hour, because again, it's going to happen a certain frequency of the time. So you don't get angry just because this is the time that you got card dead for an hour. But
yeah, how often do you get a top 10% hand?
Exactly. Let me see. Is that approximately 10% of the time?
Yeah.
I think that math works out. Yeah. So that's not going to happen very often.
Yeah.
And then think about like how many standard deviations outside of that are you going to get, where it's like, okay, so spin 3 orbits, that's 27 hands, and I haven't seen pocket aces yet. Like, what the heck, man?
Yeah. But that means the next orbit you might get it 3 times. So yeah.
This is neither here nor there, but I counted once in the home game one night. I was dealt 54 hands before I got an ace.
Yeah.
Those are some strong odds.
Yeah,
that's right. That'd be a fun one to do the math.
I forget what I calculated, but I did calculate it.
Well, and like I tell people all the time, like we're really only playing one session of poker. It starts the first hand of poker we play, and it ends the last hand of poker we play in our lives. And so sometimes we sit up and we leave the table and then we come back, but the hands that we play, like they're all just part of one big session. And ultimately that's how the frequencies are going to run. That's how the percentages are going to run. When you're in MTTs specifically, the real thing is whether you get lucky or unlucky on a hand. There's an opportunity for it to come at a time that's really important to you, which is the final table. In almost every other circumstance, it just doesn't really matter when it happens in a cash game. Like the pot size is not going to be relevantly affected by it, but because you need to take that into account when you're playing MTTs and you get to the final table, ICM is more important than, in the ways that we've talked about here. You're going to make those adjustments.
I'm a firm believer of you can be a very skilled player, but to win a tournament, you still need to have some luck during that tournament.
100%, 100%, 100%. Some of us, that's all we have.
Yeah, that's why some of us plays, because we have that actual factor.
I saw you looking at me, Jim. I saw you looking at me. I got you on video.
No, but seriously, I completely agree, John. It's just like moving to LA to be an actor. Being a good actor is not actually enough. You also need to be a little lucky. And I don't know anyone who's won a large field MTT without getting lucky through either laying a bad beat on someone, or just never getting a bad beat themselves, or just getting those slam dunks where it's like I got aces and they got kings a number of times for big pots. Like, no, it definitely matters. And so really all we're doing strategically is giving ourselves the best opportunity to win when luck doesn't go our way, so that we've got more chips, so that when that all in doesn't go our way, instead of being out, we've got 5 big blinds, stuff like that.
Well, then another way that just came to me of thinking of ICM is, part of ICM is shying away from variance, and variance is another word for luck.
Yes, it is.
So at that point, you're trying to minimize the effect that luck has on the tournament.
That's right. That's a good way of putting it, John.
Yeah, very
you're not eliminating the luck, but you're eliminating the actual effect that luck has on the outcome of the tournament. I think that's maybe 3 medals for John today. Eric and Gennaro are gonna have to pick up their game a little bit. John's rocking it.
I just finished reading Dara's book and stuff because of the satellite. So
I recommend that book. It's kind of math heavy, but I read it too. It's a very good book.
I think it's on the short list for the book study next session. So we'll see if that's
it's Endgame.
Oh yeah, that's Endgame.
Yep.
Right.
I'm going to read that whether it's on the book study or not too. But.
Yeah, he's so good. Yep. He knows what he's talking about. Well, we're getting up to the end of the hour. Is there anything else about final tables or ICM that people want to talk about? Gennaro, I did put the link to the video in the chat there if you want to get it. And if people are watching at home, on the first day of the month, we get this video from LPP, Learn Pro Poker,
Okay.
and it's in our content archive. If you just go to resources and videos, you can check it out there, along with a bunch of other stuff from our other learning partners. So it's not just Learn Pro Poker, but Solve for Why, Red Chip Poker, pokercoaching.com, Learn Pro Poker. I think got a couple more in here that for whatever reason I'm not getting right now. These are all amazing premium training sites that share with us their premium material so that our recreational players can kind of get a taste of it and see if there's someone they want to work with or another site they want to join to get some more advanced stuff. So I think that's a great program. People can go and check that out just by clicking on the Learning with Partners link in the archive there. You can get all this amazing sophisticated stuff from people that are way better at poker than I am.
Do you think that ICM would apply at all? I know ICM is kind of a math concept, so I don't think it does, but a feature table when you got all the lights and the cameras on you. And have any of you guys done that? Have you guys been on feature table?
I have not. I know Rob has. Rob Washam played in the main event several years ago, and he was on one of the feature tables. And I think he got quads on TV. So
Nice.
That's his avatar photo. I think is him laughing, smiling real big when he got to put that one to showdown. I do think there's a completely different dynamic at those because people have different incentives, right? Like depending on the tournament, someone who's trying to like make a name for themselves as a pro might actually play differently because they're on TV.
And you don't want to look like an idiot either.
And you don't want to look like an idiot.
Yeah.
Or you want to look like super advanced and savvy or something, or, you know, I think it matters a lot. And I think less experienced players are going to feel that like ICM pressure, Eric, because that's a great way to bring it up, because I think like you can go all in on someone at a feature table and they really don't want to call and be wrong. Even more so than if there wasn't a camera there. They just don't want to call and be wrong, because then like everyone gets to watch them lose this tournament, and they're imagining their friends saying like, "Oh, come on, you called with that," right?
Yeah.
And so I think it's sort of, it's a different kind of pressure, but it definitely does. That's a great point, because it definitely does change how people are going to approach that same kind of thing.
Yeah, but do you think you would kind of apply an ICM strategy to a feature table?
Oh, yeah, that's a good question.
Where you would tighten up a little bit? Or
I think in my particular case, I would probably tighten up out of position and probably try and do, well, I guess that is kind of how I play ICM. I don't want to give all my personal, but yeah, I would basically I'll just tell you, yeah, when I'm in an ICM spot, I tend to really tighten up out of position. And then if I'm going to be in position later in the hand, often I find just putting some pressure on early in the hand means that you don't even need to play the rest of the hand, because they don't want to play out of position against you. So like three betting in position is huge in ICM spots, because often what's going to happen is that it's not going to proceed beyond that point, because the other player is like, well, I don't want to play out of position in an ICM situation.
In a big pot.
Right. Yeah. So they'll just overfold 3-bets. So that would be one instance. If you're in the position where you can apply some pressure, 3-betting pre-flop is like a pretty bread and butter way to do that, particularly when you're in position. And part of it's because of the effect it has on your opponent. Then to continue in the hand, they really have to either call out of position or raise, and they're only going to do either of those things with pretty strong hands. So that's another good way to leverage that fold equity that you're talking about, Eric. All right, well, thanks, gang. Man, I love these Saturday study groups. This is awesome. Gennaro, we're gonna have to do it in person one of these days.
One of these days, yeah.
A nice little lunch place in Coburg and make it happen. I'm looking forward to that. All right, well, if anyone has any hands that have to do with ICM or final table, we got the whole rest of the month to talk about that in the forums. There's going to be a Q&A with Chris on the fourth Wednesday of the month, which I believe is the 23rd. So that's coming up.
Next week, yeah.
Let me double check that one. That is the 20th. Yeah, that's right. Yes, that's this Wednesday at 7:30. So hopefully people no, that's not right. This Wednesday. No, I'm all confused. Hold on a second here. I thought we had 5 Wednesdays this month, but we don't. This one's going to be the following Wednesday, after the online review and hangs. This will be at 9 o'clock Eastern, 8 Central on the 27th. That'll be fun. We can kind of review some of these concepts and maybe look at some hands with Chris or something like that. All right. Well, thanks, gang. Enjoy the rest of your weekend. Happy Easter. Hope you get a lot of ham or whatever it is that y'all do in your different regions for Easter. My wife, we're already in leftover mode over here, so I'm just going to be hand bombing ham for the rest of the weekend, which is pretty sweet. Pretty sweet. All right, gang. Talk again soon.
Okay. See you later.
Happy Easter.
Thanks.